In a previous clip on traducianism, soul switching, soul ties, dissociation, and possessions, we discussed the religious basis for those interpretations of what psychologists and psychiatrists define as neurological dysfunctionalities. And what I am going to do in this clip is to make a link between religious beliefs and spiritual philosophies and science. Modern day scientific study emerged from religious philosophies, specifically from a religion called cosmology. And this religion was the religion of many prominent philosophers. The reasons why religious and spiritual philosophies might be surrounded by disbelief could be due to an absence of understanding the way that religion and spiritual philosophies connect with science. So when one comes into an understanding that what we call scientific disciplines, that these scientific disciplines emerged from religion, and there remains a very strong thread of religious philosophies in what we study in modern day scientific disciplines, it might become a little easier for bridging the gap between what people believe in terms of their religious and spiritual philosophies and what they learn and read about when it comes to science and scientific discoveries and scientific evidence. So we said earlier on that modern day scientific disciplines emerged from the religious doctrines of a religion called cosmology, a very prevalent religion in ancient time. And over the years, the ways for addressing what is called scientific problems, the names were changed. So conscience is derived from Latin word which initially means without knowledge. So it is something that is underlying and you don't have facts or evidence, but it functions as an underlying principle of conscience. The term has changed over the years to refer to a specific type of processing, which we define as moral and conscience processing. And what we have found where that is concerned is that in the brain there is a specific region that becomes activated when we are faced with moral decisions or moral dilemmas, and we process these things based on conscience processing, where we use different kinds of schema to process the problem or the dilemma in which we face. So whereas the word conscience in modern term means that part of the soul, or the part, and in religion it's referred to as the part of the soul, but in psychology and psychiatry we look at it as a specific region in the brain that is activated when people are dealing with moral issues. Con, the word con, which is a suffix in this, a prefix, pardon me, in this case, at times means with and at times means without. And without sentient, sentient meaning something that is corporeal, it is something that is real, it is something that could be touched. So science was derived from the philosophy of conscient or conscience, or without sentient knowledge. And that is the reason why the starting point of all scientific research is always a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement of conscience or what the theorist believes, and he has no evidence, and therefore that becomes the hypothesis statement, and the scientist now begins to look for evidence to support his hypothesis. Over the years, the prefix con or con was dropped from conscience, and we use the term science, but essentially it means that we start off with a hypothesis, we start off without knowing, and we engage in a specific type of reasoning, including inductive and deductive reasoning, to arrive at evidence to support the hypothetical statement that we started off with. Physics, on the other hand, was also a discipline that was derived from the religious doctrines of cosmology. And in this case, physics is a shortened form for the term metaphysics. Metaphysics were incorporeal, intangible things that existed. And I'll take, for example, the concept of atoms that we use today. The concept of atoms was first proposed by a philosopher who said that if you had any object, or if you had an apple and you cut it into pieces, and very, very small pieces, and you continued cutting them into smaller and smaller pieces, there comes a time when there is no longer possible to physically cut it into any smaller piece. And he said the smallest or the infinitesimal piece into which any object could be cut is called the atomos. And the concept of atomos became incorporated into the study of metaphysics. Atoms is a construct. It is something that does not exist. It is a proposition and it is a hypothesis. And it means that because it is incorporeal, because it is intangible, it belongs to the realm of the metaphysical realm. It belongs to metaphysics, and therefore it is a study of incorporeal, intangible, and anything that is incorporeal or intangible is spiritual in nature. But on one hand, we refer to them as things as atoms, subatomic particles, we refer to quantas, etc. In religious and spiritual philosophies, incorporeal things are referred to as spirit. There was another distinction that was also made in science to give some kind of physical identity to non-physical hypothetical constructs. So let's say we will go back to using the concept of atoms. Atoms, well, what is atoms? It's a word, it's a definition that was given. And then what the metaphysicists did, it assigned the properties to this phenomena it created. Similarly to genes, genes is not a physical, something that you can touch or see. Genes were never found to be in existence in any living organisms. However, what the scientists did, they assigned the properties and characteristics that will define and identify genes from some other concept, let's say atoms. And because they were developing, they were religious philosophers, but they were developing these techniques and theories and hypothetical assumptions, and they wanted it to be incorporated into mainstream belief system and to be accepted as if they were truths. They came up with all these rules as to how they can go ahead and make this thing become something that is generally accepted. So once they developed a construct, so as I said, atoms does not exist. It's a metaphysical if you were to say, okay, does atoms exist? Well, maybe it's a metaphysical something or spiritual something. The same way you cannot see a spirit, then, or you cannot see electricity, then of course, how then do we accept it as something that is real? Well, you assign the properties to it. And because you assigned the properties to it, you gave it a physical existence. So you took it from metaphysics to physics. Unfortunately, what has happened over the years is that many of these concepts are believed to be something that has a physical existence, not in the sense of the physicist's definition, but in the sense of the layman's description of what is physical. So, for example, a table is physical, a chair is physical, a book is physical. We can touch these things. They are essentials, sentient. You can feel them, you can touch them, you might be able to smell them. Your senses, you can use your senses. So they are sentient. And science deals with things that are non-sentient, consentient, and therefore it's called science. Physics, on the other hand, also deals with things that are not corporeal, that we can touch, feel, or with our senses, but they are based on the philosophies of the early philosophers, and they developed it. And over the years, we have accepted these spiritual and incorporeal phenomena as though they are real, true, evident, and existing. And so when we think about science, on the one hand, we think about, yes, this is a discipline, these things are proven. But when you begin to talk about spirit, on the other hand, people can't figure out what it is. And if you were to understand that there are some interchanging in the way that concepts are used, for example, if we said electricity, we are really talking about what people call spirit or energy in religious and spiritual philosophies. So when we begin to talk about things such as possessions, traducianism, soul switching, etc., we are dealing with non-sentient, incorporeal concepts that might be common in religion, but which may have parallels. It might have parallels in science and physics. And science and physics are just some of those disciplines, but we also have disciplines such as quantum physics, quantum mechanics, chemistry, genetics. To a large extent, a lot of what is done in biology. And these are heavily influenced by these early religious and spiritual philosophical doctrines concerning the way the world works, except that there was a concerted effort that was put in place to grant some measure of credibility and acceptability and reliability on phenomena that we examine under these disciplines. But once we can wrap our heads around it, then we can begin to perceive what we believe and what we do within our religious and spiritual dimensions, and try to begin to make parallels so that we could apply some of the things that we believe in our religious practices and our spiritual practices, to see if they could blend with and be applied within the disciplines of science, and therefore it makes more sense to us, and then we are able to better apply it in the way we interpret our lives and the experiences that we have.